She arrived early to the corporate gala, dressed in an elegant designer gown she bought herself. She wasn't dressed like a waiter. In fact, she looked exactly like any other high-profile guest. But because she was black, people assumed she didn't belong. A staff member muttered, "Catering staff should use the back entrance." Another guest casually handed her an empty glass, thinking she was there to serve. She simply smiled, walked straight to the stage, and took the mic. "Good evening," she said. "I'm Danielle Rhodes, your keynote speaker, and the CEO of the company hosting tonight's event. If stories like this inspire you or help you see the world more clearly, show your support by giving this video a like. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button for more eye-opening content. Stay informed, stay strong, and may your day be guided by truth and positivity." The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, their light catching the champagne bubbles that floated lazily in hundreds of glasses. Outside, the city skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the velvet night. But inside, the real diamonds were draped around the necks and wrists of the elite who had gathered for what the business world called the event of the year. Danielle Rhodes stepped out of her black Tesla Model S and handed the keys to the valet with a quiet confidence that had taken her years to cultivate. The young man's eyes flickered with momentary confusion as he took in her appearance. The way the midnight blue Valentino gown hugged her curves perfectly, the way her natural hair was styled in an elegant crown of coils, the way her brown skin seemed to glow under the hotel's warm lighting. For a split second, she saw the question in his eyes, the same question she'd been seeing her entire career. "Do you belong here?" She did belong here. More than anyone else, actually. But she'd learned long ago that belonging and being accepted were two very different things. The annual Technology Innovation Summit was Rhodes Enterprises' signature event, a gathering of the most influential minds in tech, finance, and innovation. For 3 years running, it had become the must-attend event for anyone serious about the future of business. Tonight, over 800 of the world's most powerful people would wine and dine while discussing deals that would reshape industries. Danielle had arrived deliberately early, a habit she developed after years of being the only black face in rooms full of white executives. She'd learned that arriving early gave her a buffer. Time to settle in, to claim her space, to prepare for the inevitable moments when people would question her presence. As she walked through the hotel's opulent lobby, her heels clicking against the marble with purpose, she caught sight of herself in one of the ornate mirrors. The woman looking back at her was a far cry from the girl who had grown up in a cramped apartment in Detroit, whose mother had worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on, whose father had been absent more often than present. That girl had dreamed of moments like this, but she'd never imagined how lonely they would feel. The elevator ride to the ballroom felt eternal. When the doors opened, she was greeted by the soft hum of conversation and the gentle clink of silverware being arranged by the catering staff. The room was already beginning to fill with early arrivals. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than most people's cars. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through her observations. Danielle turned to see a thin woman in a severe black suit approaching her. The woman's badge identified her as Margaret Steinberg, event coordinator. "I'm sorry, but catering staff should use the back entrance. We've discussed this with your supervisor." Danielle's smile never wavered, though something cold settled in her chest. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice steady and professional. Margaret's expression grew impatient. "Look, I don't have time for this. The guests will be arriving soon, and we need all servers in position. Please use the service entrance in the future." Without another word, Margaret turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Danielle standing alone near the entrance. The familiar burn of humiliation crept up her neck, but she pushed it down. She'd learned to swallow these moments, to turn them into fuel rather than let them consume her. As she moved deeper into the ballroom, admiring the ice sculptures and floral arrangements that had cost more than most people's annual salaries, she noticed other guests beginning to arrive. The conversations were typical. Discussions of quarterly earnings, speculation about market trends, gossip about who was sleeping with whom in the C-suite. "The champagne is excellent tonight," a voice said beside her. Danielle turned to see a distinguished man in his 60s, his silver hair perfectly styled, his tuxedo clearly custom-made. He was holding an empty champagne flute and looking at her expectantly. "I'm sure it is," she replied, not moving to take the glass. He jiggled the flute slightly. "Could you grab me another? And maybe some of those little salmon things I saw going around earlier." The man's assumption hit her like a physical blow. Here she was, dressed in a gown that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her makeup professionally done, her jewelry carefully chosen, and yet this man, this successful, educated man, looked at her and saw only someone whose job it was to serve him. "I'm not working the event," she said quietly. The man's face flushed red. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought." He stammered, clearly flustered, before quickly walking away without finishing his sentence. Danielle watched him go, her heart pounding. She'd handled the situation with more grace than he deserved, but the encounter left her shaken. How many times had this happened over the years? How many times had people looked at her and seen only what they expected to see? She made her way to the bar, needing something to steady her nerves. The bartender, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled warmly as she approached. "What can I get you, miss?" "Whiskey neat, please. Top shelf." As the bartender prepared her drink, Danielle noticed two women nearby engaged in animated conversation. Their voices carried just enough for her to catch fragments. "Can't believe they're actually going to let a woman run the company. Affirmative action at its finest." Probably slept her way to the top. The words hit her like physical blows. They were talking about her appointment as CEO, about the announcement that would be made tonight. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was standing 20 feet away from women who were discussing her qualifications, her competence, her very right to exist in this space, and they had no idea she was there. She took a long sip of her whiskey, letting the burn ground her. This was nothing new. She'd been hearing whispers like this for years, ever since she'd started climbing the corporate ladder. Every promotion, every success, every breakthrough had been met with the same underlying assumption. She couldn't possibly have earned it on her own merit. But she had earned it. Every sleepless night studying for her MBA while working full-time. Every time she'd bitten her tongue when a male colleague took credit for her ideas. Every presentation she'd over-prepared for because she knew she'd be scrutinized twice as hard as her white counterparts. Every deal she'd closed. Every innovation she'd spearheaded. Every time she'd proven the doubters wrong. Danielle? She turned to see James Morrison, the chairman of the board, approaching with a warm smile. James was one of the few people in the business world who had never made her feel like she had to prove herself. He'd been her mentor, her champion, and often her shield against the more prejudiced elements of the corporate world. "James," she said, returning his smile, "everything looks beautiful tonight." "It should. You put enough work into planning it." He studied her face with the concern of someone who'd known her for years. "How are you feeling? Ready for tonight?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she said, though they both knew the weight of what tonight meant. Tonight wasn't just about announcing her promotion to CEO. It was about breaking a barrier that had stood firm for decades. Rhodes Enterprises had been founded by James's grandfather in 1952, and in all that time, it had never had a female CEO, much less a black female CEO. The appointment had been controversial within the company and throughout the industry. Some board members had argued for a safer choice. Some shareholders had questioned whether the market was ready for such a radical change. But the numbers didn't lie. Under Danielle's leadership as COO, the company had seen its most profitable years in history. Her innovative approach to sustainable technology had opened new markets and attracted a younger, more diverse client base. Her strategic partnerships had expanded their global reach exponentially. By any objective measure, she was not just qualified for the position, she was the best choice. "You know," James said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "my grandfather would be rolling over in his grave if he knew a black woman was about to run his company." Danielle's heart stopped for a moment, but James continued with a smile that reached his eyes. "And I couldn't be prouder of that fact. He was a brilliant businessman, but he was also a product of his time. This company has needed fresh blood, new perspectives, and most importantly, it's needed someone who truly understands what it means to fight for success. You've earned this position 10 times over." The weight of his words settled over her like a warm blanket. James had been taking risks by supporting her advancement, and she knew it. In boardrooms full of old white men, advocating for a young black woman hadn't been the safe political move. But he'd done it anyway, because he believed in her abilities. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than he would ever know. As the evening progressed, the ballroom filled with the who's who of the business world. Danielle recognized faces from magazine covers, people whose names appeared regularly in the financial press, decision-makers who controlled billions of dollars in assets. And yet, as she moved through the crowd, she continued to be mistaken for staff. A woman in a sequined gold dress stopped her near the dessert table. "Excuse me, could you tell the kitchen that the beef is a little overdone? I'm at table 12. A man in a navy tuxedo intercepted her on her way to the restroom. "Are you the coordinator? I need to change my seating arrangement. I can't sit next to my ex-wife." Each incident chipped away at her composure a little more. She'd developed thick skin over the years, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she was supposed to be celebrating the culmination of everything she'd worked for, and instead, she was being reminded of how far society still had to go. By the time dinner was served, she'd been mistaken for catering staff 7 times, asked to fetch drinks 4 times, and completely ignored by 3 different groups of people she tried to join in conversation. The irony was overwhelming. She was the guest of honor at her own event, and yet she was being treated like she didn't belong. As the evening wore on, she found herself studying the faces around her. These were intelligent, successful people. They weren't intentionally cruel or malicious, but their assumptions revealed something deeper, something more troubling than outright racism. They revealed a worldview so narrow that they literally couldn't see beyond their own experiences. When a black woman appeared in their elite space, dressed elegantly and carrying herself with confidence, their minds couldn't process it. So they defaulted to the only framework they had. She must be there to serve. The time finally came for the evening's main event. James took the stage, the conversations gradually dying down as people realized it was time for the official program. Danielle stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding as she watched him adjust the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," James began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Thank you all for joining us for what I believe will be remembered as a historic night for Rhodes Enterprises." The crowd murmured appreciatively, champagne glasses raised in anticipation. As many of you know, after 35 years as CEO of this company, I've decided it's time to pass the torch to the next generation of leadership. The board and I have spent considerable time identifying the right person to guide Rhodes Enterprises into the future. Danielle could feel her palms getting sweaty. This was it, the moment she'd been working toward her entire career. "The choice wasn't difficult," James continued. "The numbers speak for themselves. Under this person's leadership as Chief Operating Officer, we've seen unprecedented growth, innovative partnerships, and a complete transformation of our company culture. Revenue has increased by 340% over the past 5 years. We've successfully entered 12 new markets. And most importantly, we've proven that a company can be both profitable and socially responsible. The crowd was listening intently now, clearly impressed by the statistics. Our new CEO is someone who understands that success isn't just about quarterly earnings. It's about building sustainable value for all stakeholders. Someone who's proven that diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's a competitive advantage. Someone who's shown that innovation comes from embracing different perspectives, not from maintaining the status quo. Danielle's chest tightened. She could see some people in the crowd looking around, trying to guess who James was describing. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to introduce the new CEO of Rhodes Enterprises. Please join me in welcoming Danielle Rhodes. The silence that followed was deafening. Danielle had expected applause, but instead, she was met with confusion, uncertainty, and in some cases, visible shock. People were looking around, trying to figure out where this Danielle Rhodes was supposed to be. She began walking toward the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor with more confidence than she felt. As she moved through the crowd, she could see the exact moment when recognition dawned on each face. The woman they'd been ignoring all night, the person they'd mistaken for catering staff, the black woman they'd assumed didn't belong. She was their new CEO. The expressions ranged from embarrassment to disbelief to something that might have been respect. Margaret Steinberg, the event coordinator who had told her to use the back entrance, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The man who had asked her to fetch his champagne was staring at her with his mouth slightly open. By the time she reached the stage, the crowd had found its voice. The applause started slowly, tentatively, but gradually built to something that sounded genuine. James handed her the microphone with a smile that said, "I told you so," without words. Danielle stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. These were the people who would be her partners, her competitors, her colleagues. Some of them had just learned a valuable lesson about assumptions and prejudice. Others would probably never understand what had happened tonight. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Danielle Rhodes, your keynote speaker, and the CEO of the company hosting tonight's event." She paused, letting the words sink in. The silence was complete now, every person in the room hanging on her words. "I want to thank everyone who's been so helpful tonight. The people who told me to use the back entrance, the guests who handed me their empty glasses, the individuals who asked me to fetch their appetizers. You've given me something invaluable, a reminder of why change is so necessary." She could see people shifting uncomfortably, some looking down at their hands, others whispering to their companions. Tonight isn't just about a change in leadership at Rhodes Enterprises. It's about a change in perspective. It's about recognizing that talent, intelligence, and leadership come in all forms. It's about understanding that when we make assumptions based on appearance, we don't just hurt individuals. We hurt ourselves, our companies, and our society. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "I've spent my entire career proving that I belong in rooms like this. But tonight, I'm here to tell you that I'm done proving myself. I'm here to lead, to innovate, and to build something better. And I'm here to ensure that the next generation of leaders, regardless of their gender, their race, or their background, won't have to prove themselves the way I have." The applause this time was thunderous, not because they felt obligated, but because they understood. She had taken what could have been a moment of humiliation and transformed it into a moment of power. As she looked out at the crowd, she saw James beaming with pride. She saw Margaret Steinberg wiping away tears. She saw the man who had handed her his champagne glass nodding with what looked like newfound respect. But most importantly, she saw the future. A future where a young black girl from Detroit could dream of moments like this and know that they were possible. where assumptions would be challenged, barriers would be broken, and excellence would be recognized regardless of the package it came in. The little girl who had once dreamed of belonging in rooms like this had finally arrived. And she was here to stay.